Welcome back to another edition of the Quantum Yoga Podcast. I'm very excited to have Dr. James Oschman on the program today. And Dr. Jim's a biophysicist, researcher, author of numerous publications, including Energy Medicine, The Scientific Basis, and Energy Medicine in Therapeutics and Peak Performance. So thank you, Jim, for coming on the program.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a delight.
Let's, my goodness, I've been trying to figure out a great place to start, and I think it will be with a discussion of the living matrix. So can you introduce the listeners to this and its various components?
Okay, this was, I think, my most significant contribution to the science of bodywork and movement therapies and alternative medicine. And it came about because I was working in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, across the hall from Albert Szent-Györgyi, who was a very famous scientist, who considered by many to be the most creative person in the 20th century. He got the Nobel Prize in 1937 for the synthesis of vitamin C, and he was considered the father of modern biochemistry. And he was studying collagen, the molecule that makes up connective tissue. It's the most abundant molecule in the human body. It's a long, thin, fibrous protein, and it makes up most of the body. The fascia, all the connective tissue, ligaments, tendons, bones, all of the fabric components of the body. And he was discovering that collagen is a semiconductor, which is obscure to most people, but semiconductors are the key to our modern electronics industry. And he is now acknowledged as the very important discoverer of the semiconducting nature of living molecules. And that amounts to some more than half of our world economy is electronics, microelectronics. So he made a major discovery, but nobody really paid much attention. I was listening. And at about the same time that I heard him talk about collagen being a semiconductor, a scientist in Cambridge, England, discovered that there are proteins that go across the surface of cells. They're now called integrins. They're very important molecules because they connect everything that's going on outside of the cell with things going on inside of the cell, and vice versa. They're a two-way pathway for energy and information. And that was the aha moment of connecting all I knew about cellular structure and cellular function with what I was learning about connective tissue, the stuff outside of the cell. Here was this link across the cell surface, making it a continuous system. And the exciting thing about it is that people have studied the parts very carefully. They have taken cells apart, they've isolated the different fibers inside of cells, they have names for them. People have studied the connective tissue, they know a lot about collagen. All of that information taken together is a very thorough description of a system that I believe is a system that we can talk about when we talk about holistic, about whole systems, because it goes everywhere in the body. It's the only system in the body that touches all of the other systems. And therefore it has the possibility, as information and energy moves through it, to coordinate different processes everywhere in the body so that every cell and every tissue can work together to do whatever it is you're trying to do. So that figured importantly in human performance. I got started on that tack when I watched the Olympics, the Olympic ice skaters. I was not paying a lot of attention until Midori Ito came onto the ice and did an incredible performance that took my breath away. It was It was emotional. It was beautiful. It was perfect. She was the only woman who ever did a triple axel in the Olympics successfully. She was amazing. And I just had to figure out, what is that situation that many athletes and dancers and musicians refer to as the zone, the state of consciousness. Is this a state of consciousness where you can do a perfect performance? Unless you think about it and think, I'm doing a perfect performance, I'm in the zone, and immediately you're out of the zone. So it has to do with emptiness, of having nothing going on in your head. And I knew enough therapists by that time that I knew that there was a similar state in therapeutics, that when someone is doing body work of any kind, or cranial sacral or whatever, there are special moments when everything else falls away and they are just totally connected to their client. And what is that? What is that state of consciousness? And I realized that it's also a state of your body. When all of the systems are connected to all of the other systems, I called it systemic cooperation. Fritz Popp in Germany called it Gestaltbildung, which is, in his view, when light is connecting all of the molecules together so that everything works in a coordinated way. So that's how I got started on that tack. And I saw the living matrix as one of the means by which cells and tissues can communicate with each other.
Give us an idea of some of these systems that people may have heard about as being as part of this living matrix. For example, the meridian system, as I understand it, is part of this living matrix, as are many others. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. One of the things Albert Szent-Györgyi said was, life is too rapid and subtle to be explained by slow-moving nerve impulses and chemical reactions. And that seemed to be a profound statement. And I wondered what he meant. And I've been following that track for a number of years, and recently wrote a paper with a psychiatrist who was very interested in the living matrix and how he connects with his clients through the living matrix. He viewed the acupuncture points, as the integrins of the body, the places that connect across the skin to the fibrous living matrix that spreads throughout the body. And he could go into his clients through those points and explore their psyche. And he was a meditator for many years, and he got answers to what was going on with his patients. And he would tell them, and they would say, yes, how did you know that? And he didn't know it. He just allowed it to come in. So we wrote a paper together, and we described, after many years of thinking about life is too rapid and subtle to be explained by chemical reactions and nerve impulses, we listed 4 or 5 different other systems in the body that are hundreds and maybe thousands of times faster than nerve impulses. I'm glad I have a nervous system. It does many things, but it does not do as much as we give it credit for. It does not coordinate everything. There are other systems. One of them is biochemical. It's called wetware. There's a book called Wetware by a Cambridge scientist, a biochemist, who describes how the chemical reactions in a cell can act as a communication system. And that's very interesting. Another communication system are the biofields, the fields that penetrate and surround our bodies. The biggest one being the field produced by the heart, the electrical energy of the heart, that creates a magnetic field in the space around us that many therapists utilize in their work. So that's another rapid means of communication. Another one is light. The Gestaltbildung that Fritz Albert Popp described. Unfortunately, there's very little research in this area in the United States. Most of it's going on in Europe and other countries. But I go to Europe a lot, and I know these people, and I know about this work, and it's very interesting. Why would evolution neglect light as a means of communication and coordination in the body, since light travels at the speed of light? So there's a lot of evidence now that light is involved in everything that's going on in the body. So those are some of the systems that are faster than, and there may be other systems that are actually faster than light. Einstein said nothing can go faster than the speed of light, but it turns out that that was a mistake. And there are things that do go faster than the speed of light, and some of those may be involved in our bodies. Our bodies had millions of years of evolutionary trial and error to try out all the laws of physics and use whatever worked well. So we are living examples. If you want to understand physics, if you want to learn how physics is really happening, look at the human body. We do amazing things with physics, and we're just scratching the surface of understanding that. That's why I'm glad I'm a biophysicist. I study biology from the physics perspective and physics from the biology perspective. I have fun. This is very interesting stuff.
It's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And
it really is. In fact, I tell people that it's probably not legal to have as much fun as I have.
Woo!
But so far, I haven't been caught.
Well, so let's talk a little bit more about biophotons as communication systems. Tell us a little bit more about this. It's hard to find it here, as I understand it. The Institute for Biophoton Research in Germany is sort of like it's sort of the centerpiece of that movement right now. Is that correct?
Well, it was. They've kind of run out of gas, or money, as you might say, but I'm hopeful that it starts up again. The key book is by Marco Bischoff, and it's all in German, and I'm trying to get it translated into English so that I can read it. I look at the pictures, and that helps a little bit, but I really need to read his book, and it's amazing. But that work is being continued by many labs around the world, and it's very exciting. I mean, light can be used to detect problem areas in the body, where you have inflammation. Certain frequencies of light are given off. Where you have disease, certain frequencies are given off that can be used for diagnosis and for treatment. You can apply light. And in fact, I'll be going to the International Light Association conference. I think it's in March or May in Oslo, Norway. I've been interacting with these amazing people who do amazing work with light, using it for healing, using it for understanding how the body works. We don't understand a lot about how the body works. I mean, you may have the impression that we know a lot because there are a lot of books in the library that talk about physiology and biochemistry and so on, but there are too many unanswered questions, and I love those unanswered questions. I love the exploration. It's fascinating.
So biophotons being the basis of cellular communication as one mode of communication, right?
Right.
As a basis of biochemical reactions.
Yeah. Well, the chemical model is that there are molecules called signal molecules that diffuse around in the body from a source like a gland or a nerve. They diffuse around until they bump into a receptor on the surface of a cell, somewhere a distance away. That model is, I think, a little bit impossible. It's just way too slow. Diffusion is random. Molecules diffuse kind of in all different directions. There's no particular motivation for them to go in a particular direction. So random diffusion is a weak concept for cellular control. And the other part of it is the lock and key model. The idea is that the hormone or neurotransmitter or whatever the signal is like a key, and the receptor is like a lock. And it's an easy concept to grasp because everybody has put a key in a lock and unlocked a door. So you can get it, and once you get it, it becomes embedded in your psyche. And when you think of interactions of molecules, you think of locks and keys. And that may be missing a whole other realm of interactions that we need to look at. So one of the things I'm doing is dissecting the lock and key model from the perspective of quantum physics, among other things. I'm taking another look at it. There's more to the story.
Yeah,
There's always more to the story.
It sounds like the hard part is figuring out what thing you want to focus on, right? There's so much interesting questions, so many interesting questions.
Well, I focus on everything. I discovered that if you want to understand the human body, you have to study everything. There's no part of our intellectual matrix that is irrelevant. And that means I have had to study cosmology and astrophysics and geophysics, which geophysics doesn't sound like it's part of biology, but it is. It's an important aspect of biology. And you have to study music. There's music therapy. You have to study poetry. There's no aspect of our lives that is separate from our biology. So I study everything.
One thing that's quite popular in the biohacking movement right now, for lack of a better word, biohacking movement, is the use of red light and near-infrared light for mitochondrial upregulation. And this would fit into the study of biophotons as a communication, correct?
Absolutely. Red light is very important and may be one of the key communication mechanisms in the body. And there's a lot that's known about that. So I think that branch of biohacking makes a lot of sense. And just to give you an example, and this is a really juicy example, probably not widely known, there's a scientist at Northwestern University in Chicago at the medical school, Günther Albrecht Bühler, he's German, who has found that skin cells, fibroblasts that create connective tissue and lay down skin and things like that, talk to each other with light. And one of the important studies was done at Woods Hole by Jay Lash, who's somebody I knew when I worked in Woods Hole. And he studied, I think, salamanders. And what he would do is he would put dye, little particles of dye, he'd inject it into a skin cell, and then some distance away he would make a cut in the skin, and he could follow the skin cell, the fibroblast, migrating towards the cut and measure their velocity, millimeters per hour. And they move to the cut and do the repair work. And that's pretty interesting. That's nice that cells do that, that they're listening from a distance and they know there's been an injury and they go towards it. One of the key energetics of that is called the injury potential. The skin is like a battery, And when you puncture it or cut it, it's like a short circuit, and it sets up an electrical field that draws cells to the site of injury, the injury potential. And what Albrecht Buehler did was he pulsed red light he had cultures of cells. He would pulse red light, and he would notice that the cells migrated towards the place where the light was hitting. And he realized that the cells have something like an eye in them. And he found out where the eye was. And it's in an organelle called the centriole, which is a very interesting little organelle. And the way he proved that the centriole, well, we don't really prove anything in science, but he got a very good indication that the centriole is the eye of the cell by setting up a situation where a cell would be attracted to a light, to an infrared light, but he blinded the cell by focusing red light on the centriole. Centriole couldn't see, and so the cell didn't migrate towards the light. Very clever experiments. And so that talks about injury repair. Very important in healing work is the repair of injuries. And why is it that sometimes an injury doesn't repair or repairs slowly? This is very important in healing work. Why is it that sometimes an injury just doesn't want to heal? And this is because the way I see it is the matrix and the other communication systems aren't working optimally. So the conversation isn't taking place, the conversation that causes cells to do what they need to do to migrate to the place where the injury is. So that's part of the story of the matrix. And the meridian system. This is well known in acupuncture that there may be blockages in the meridian which prevent necessary communication. So this is all pretty simple, basic wiring of the body.
Let's, since you brought up talking about injury potentials, it's a great segue into talking about Becker's work. And I would love for you to tell the audience about the dual nervous system and explain this whole concept, because most people are kind of familiar with the basic neuronal model, right?
Yeah, most people don't realize that nerves actually have very little to do with healing. That may seem a surprise, but the main role of the nervous system in healing is to convey pain messages so that, for example, if you sprain your ankle, you rearrange your walking to place less energy, less force on your ankle. It's called limping. Limping is a program of the nervous system to take the pressure off something that's injured. So that's the main thing that the nervous system does. And what Becker discovered in his papers, although they're not cited very often, are classic papers, beautifully written, beautiful research showing that the connective tissue sheath around the nerves is another communication system. And he called it the DC, or direct current system. It's an analog system. Those who are familiar with electronics know that there are digital systems and analog systems. Analog systems, the bigger the force, the bigger the output. Digital systems just need a push and you get a pulse, like the nervous system. The regular nervous system is all or none. You either get a signal or you don't. It's digital. It's either on or off. Whereas this connective tissue system around the nerves, they're called the perineurium. Peri means around. It's the tissue around the nerves. And it's a direct current system. that is activated when you have an injury and regulates this amazing process, which is, I have to make an adjustment here. This amazing process, when you have an injury, a bunch of things happen. And there's the repair process that's activated by this DC system. And the repair process continues until it's finished. How does the body know when it's done? What is the mechanism for that? And that all resides, we think, in the paraneural system. And in the DC regulatory system, what happens when you have an injury is that the body compensates by using other systems so that you can function. Function continues. That's pretty amazing in itself, how that gets started and how it stops, how those other systems are shut down after the injury is repaired. That's pretty remarkable. So Robert Becker's papers on this subject they're in Subtle Energies magazine, which is available online, a very valuable source of information about all kinds of energetic phenomena. It's the magazine produced by the International Society for the Study of Subtle Energies and Energy Medicine, ICEME.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit. I watched one of your presentations at the Electric Universe conference. What was that? 2006? Were you speaking there?
I don't remember the year, but I remember speaking there. It's quite an interesting group.
Yeah. Well, so what I loved about it was you took your living matrix model, which is a fully integrated model, and it would make sense then that since our biological system is fully integrated, that we are integrated with a larger cosmological system. And so it seemed like a perfect fit. I guess where I'm going is if you can sort of explain how our living matrix is some of the ways it's interacting with the larger solar events, geomagnetic events, and why this is important.
Well, I'm so delighted that you brought that up. That's a very interesting subject that I'm working on intensely right now. What is the relationship between us and the cosmos? And it now appears that space is not empty. The quantum vacuum is not an emptiness. There is a fabric in space that extends everywhere. And everywhere means everywhere inside of your body, because what we have the most of inside of us is space. And that space is continuous with all space out to the distant stars and galaxies. And what is the nature of that fabric? And there are a lot of good reasons to be interested in that. One of the most exciting to me is Rupert Sheldrake's model of morphic resonance. Whenever the scientific community says that somebody is a nut, I'm very interested. When his work was totally rejected, that often means he's onto something. And what he's onto, I think, is the answer to the question, how did you develop from a single cell? We don't know. He has an idea. It's a far out idea, but maybe he's right. And if he's right, it's really important. We're taught that DNA is the blueprint of life. It isn't. DNA is not the blueprint of life. It's an open question. And Sheldrake has this fantastic idea that there's a memory somewhere of all organisms that have ever lived. And this is actually an ancient idea. It's called the Akashic field and what is the Akashic field. And I never paid much attention to the idea until I realized that the fields in space have the potential to store information. And it turns out Sheldrake and a number of other very distinguished scientists, very well-known, important physicists and philosophers and quantum physicists and so on, are convinced that memory is not in the brain. We all learn that this is where consciousness is, inside of our heads. There's a big problem. There are people who don't have anything in their heads. If you do an MRI of them, all you see is maybe a little bit of brain matter, mostly fluid. What is going on there? That is really embarrassing, because our models of consciousness are based on nerves interacting with each other to create moment-to-moment consciousness, and maybe something else is going on. Maybe memory is actually in space, in the space around and within us. I find that to be a fascinating idea. Some quantum physicists are convinced that that is actually what is going on. So I'm interested in looking at the fabric of space, and one of the, and I'll show you. Here it is. This is an important discovery. It's called the flower of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I came upon this because I was asked to explain how a device works. I met a gentleman in Barcelona who invented a device that helps protect people from environmental pollution, environmental electromagnetic fields. And that's a huge problem and growing. There are more and more people with electromagnetic sensitivity and sickness. They get sick, and the doctors don't know what to do. They don't understand that the problem is with the electromagnetic fields from Wi-Fi and cell phones and things like that. We don't want to think that our cell phones are bad for us, but it's looking more and more like they may not be so good for us. So this fellow had invented a device, and it had on its surface this image, the flower of life, which I had never even heard of before. I had to study to find out what that image represented. And it turns out it's related to the golden mean, phi, which serious scholars have been studying for over 1,000 years to try to figure out why it is so profoundly important. And I finally got the picture that the reason it's so important is because it is the design of the fabric of space. Mm. And wearing this shirt that has the flower of life on it actually affects my relationship with environmental electromagnetic fields. Mm. As odd as that may seem. And I had a colleague do a muscle test on my shirts, and the shirts that had the flower of life, I was stronger, especially the colored ones. This one has, that I'm wearing now, has color. Color is important. Hmm. Isn't that interesting? Hmm. I find that to be completely fascinating. So I think what we're talking about here is the actual geometry, the fabric of space. And I'm putting together the pieces. I think we have all the pieces. And
does this relate at all to Dr. Kareem's work? Are you familiar with Dr. Kareem, biogeometry? Yes,
absolutely. For sure.
Okay, we're interviewing him. I'm interviewing him in 2 weeks, so this will be a great segue to that.
Good.
Yeah.
He has a student. I think his name is Gilbert, who I was giving a talk to the healing touch people. And I had an article that this fellow wrote about sacred geometry from Gilbert, and I had it up on, I put the slide up and showed the picture of the first page of his article, and there was a noise at the back of the room. He walked into the room at the moment that I put that slide up. Give me a break. There are things that go on behind the scenes that are mysterious and wonderful and surprising. And
this fabric of space that you're investigating, and you're associating the golden mean as this geometric pattern of this fabric. Could we call this ether?
Ether is a term that has been used. There's an interesting book called Void, came out recently, which describes the history of space. And it's gone back and forth between space is a fabric to space is nothing to a fabric to an ether. It's gone back and forth. And now I think the consensus is that there is a fabric to space. And part of it is from Einstein. The idea that space is distorted around matter, and that the planets sort of do their orbits because they're like in a little valley created around the sun by the matter. Interesting validation, and that's accepted. So ether is one term that has been used historically.
What are some other terms that people may have heard of to describe this fabric?
I'm calling it the quantum information field. And I believe this this image of the sacred geometry images, scientists don't usually like to use the word sacred, but what it is, it's quantum physics. It's the physics of space. And there's a major group of physicists in Europe. I think they worked for 10 years, and they determined that the fabric of space follows the golden mean. They created a string of magnetic atoms, one atom thick, and they plucked it with a magnetic field, and it went boing, 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 and the frequency of the vibration was phi, the frequency of the golden mean. So that was pretty dramatic demonstration that what we're talking about has a quantum basis, and that magic number of phi, which has been used for centuries in design of architecture, and Kareem will tell you all about it. He even made a pendant for patients. It has the sacred geometry on it. For patients with hepatitis C, they got better. He did a huge clinical trial, and just wearing this thing made them better. So I never got into jewelry before, but now I see that people sell jewelry that has this symbol on it. I think it's more than decorative.
Where does scalar energy fit into this?
Well, that's the field that is the fabric of space, I believe. And I've written about that a little bit, and I'll be writing more about it. The scalar fields were deleted from the equations of electromagnetism in the late 1800s, which was a disaster. Heaviside and Gibbs and a few others didn't like the scalar, and they're called potential fields. They are the energies that underlie electricity, and magnetism. Very basic. And the scalar field doesn't have a velocity. And this is what the physicists didn't like. It didn't seem physical to them that a field could connect instantaneously with everything in space. That bothered them. So they eliminated the equations, scalar and vector potentials and all of that stuff. And it's been out of physics for 100 years. There was a study in the 50s, Aronoff and Bohm showed that the scalar field exists, is real. And we're just beginning to catch up with ourselves in terms of what scalars can do. But I think the scalar field is the way that the quantum information field works. It's holographic, it's fractal, and probably has tensegrity geometry. Tensegrity being Buckminster-Fuller's design plan, which is resonant and congruent with the fabric of the body, which is also tensegrous. So look up tensegrity in Buckminster-Fuller and you'll be seeing the fabric of space and the fabric of the body. Similar geometries resonate with each other.
Which is part of Sheldrake's morphic resonance philosophy.
Exactly.
Right.
So I think I'm describing, and the reason this is so important, I think, is because when we understand this, I think we'll be able to regenerate limbs and organs. We'll understand how our structure, where it comes from, what is the design principle? Where is the design principle for making a human body? And this is what goes wrong in cancer. Something is out of kilter with the fundamental design of our tissues and organs. So this is not a trivial matter, and I don't think those people who poo-pooed Sheldrake did us a great service. One of the editors of Nature magazine wrote that his book was a candidate for burning, which is a terrible thing to say. It brings to mind the days in Germany when they took books out of libraries and burned them because they wanted people to be stupid. And I know what it feels like to have that said, because a reviewer of one of my books said this book should be taken to the beach and left there to be washed out to sea. Real complimentary statement.
I remember when his TED Talk was removed after he was one of 3, I believe, speakers that were removed from the TED Talk list, and everybody I know wanted to watch it right away, and it's funny how that suppression that occurred created a tremendous interest in what he was saying, because it was reposted virally everywhere all at once. It was
great. Yeah,
it was pretty fun to watch. Getting back to the scalar energy, you have this great diagram in your book about the Mobius coil, the toroid, as being able to produce these. Can you talk a little bit about the coils involved?
Well, one of the great things about that is that it is the design of the ventricles of the heart. And back in the 80s, I was real interested in circuits in the body, electrical circuits, information, energy circuits in the body. And I was looking at Gray's Anatomy. You can't read it. It's this thick and weighs 10 pounds. But I was reading in the section on the heart, and they referenced an article about the electric circulation. I thought that sounded very interesting. And I asked the interlibrary loan librarian to get me a copy of that article. And it took her a month, and she came back to me and said, that article does not exist in the United States. I suggest that you write to the editors of Gray's Anatomy and ask them if they know anything about the article. So I wrote to Peter Warwick in London, and he wrote back and he said that article was written by Torrent Guasp, who comes to London periodically, Guasp, and he's an interesting man, and here's his address, and write to him. So I wrote to him, and he sent me a whole bunch of articles. Dear Dr. Oschman, he wrote, thank you for your interest in my work. And it turned out that, like Sheldrake, he was viewed as a kook. And now it's been discovered that he made a really important discovery. It took him 50 years, and he unraveled the structure of the ventricles. And he sent me this model that was made to give to doctors at conferences. And it shows that the ventricle is a single band of muscle that coils up as a double helix, which is an interesting geometry, meaning that it will resonate with other double helices in the body like DNA. And it turns out, and we wrote a paper about this, that this is a Mobius strip. And the Mobius strip has a place. It's like if you take a strip of paper and fold it over on itself and glue it to itself so it has one surface in a figure 8. Escher has a nice diagram of a Mobius strip with ants crawling along the surface. And I use that illustration. There's an animation on the web of the ants crawling along the surface. And that, it turns out, makes the ventricle, a scalar field antenna, meaning that it can plug in to scalar fields extending throughout space. It's both a transmitting and a receiving antenna. And I believe that this is where our intuition comes from. The Akashic records, if you pay attention, and there are on the web, I discovered articles on how to do it, how to tap into the Akashic field, which has information on everything that has ever happened and ever will happen. And I never paid much attention to that until I realized space has the property. The quantum information field has that property. It makes sense, strange as it sounds. So this model has been very interesting, and it turns out the place where the fibers turn over so that it makes a single surface is very delicate. I've shown this at conferences, and people pick it up and play with it, and one time it broke. And I had a broken heart. And I fixed it with super glue. So that's interesting to know that you can fix a broken heart with super glue. And I'm going to the Energy Psychology Conference next year, or this year. We're now in next year. And I realized that place may be a very vulnerable place in our psyche. It may be the place that is a broken heart from a relationship is a very real thing. And most people have had rejection or broken hearts for one reason or another. And I'm going to focus on that place where the fibers turn over. It's delicate. It's crucial to our psychic abilities, our abilities to see the future. Those psychic phenomena that are well known to women that men think are a bunch of nonsense, like clairvoyance, knowing that something is going to happen. And there are good studies that show that clairvoyance is real. The people at HeartMath have done a bunch of studies documenting our ability to scan into the future. I think the heart, and they think the heart is the key. McCready, who was one of the authors on the papers, said that the heart is able to tune into a field that contains information distant in time and space. Well, that seemed to be the right conclusion from their results. And I know that prayer and distant healing work. It works. Every branch of alternative medicine is now teaching distant healing. And the skeptics say it can't work because there's no scientific explanation for it. I'm sorry. There is a scientific explanation, and it's in quantum physics. And this is it.
Well, I'm glad we're actually, I'm going to interview Roland next week. I'll be at HeartMath, and that's one of the things that I want to get into with him is their intuition studies that they did, which is fascinating. Really, Rick.
Oh, great. I'm glad you're doing that. If I had something to say, I would give them a Nobel Prize. They have done such great work at HeartMath.
One of the things that I heard Roland speak about, you're probably familiar with their global coherence project and the magnetometers that they have everywhere and the magnetic flux lines that are being plucked and its relationship to the solar wind and its relationship to the heart. The human heart, and that they've found that the obviously when you are breathing in this 5 second in, 5 second out with an elevated emotion, you bring heart coherence in the human being at 0.1 hertz is the same resonant frequency of the Earth's magnetic field when it's in resonance, and that they believe that this is one of the ways, if not the way, that we are connected heart to heart.
I love that. We are all part of each other, and we need to realize that and remember it. The way I describe this is I tell people you need to learn about energetics. Learn about your own energy, the energetics of life. And if you do, if you understand these things, you will have a long, happy, healthy life, because energy is your companion, inescapably. So we need to learn about these things. I tell people you have to be responsible for your thoughts, because as Bruce Lipton has shown, and others, what you think can affect your DNA, can affect your health, and the way you think about your health can affect your health profoundly. So we need to use mental hygiene, which is thinking good thoughts and trying to reduce our dwelling on thoughts that aren't good for us, because it's not for any other reason, not for any ethical reason, because it's good for us.
What is the role of the mitochondria in our biology, in the living matrix, in our relationship to the cosmos? Can you maybe talk a little bit from your perspective on your investigations in the mitochondria?
Yes. One of the most important things that the mitochondria do is they transport electrons. The electron transport chain in mitochondria generates ATP, which is the energy molecule of life. And one of the best sources of electrons for your mitochondria is the Earth, the surface of the Earth. And this is why grounding, earthing, is so important. And in fact, right now, I'm writing about earthing. It has profound health effects. Virtually anything that disturbs your health can be rapidly balanced. Your systems can be brought to balance by taking your shoes and socks off and walking on the grass. It seems so simple, it's ridiculous. But we've done, I think, coming on to 20 years of research, dozens of scientific articles on why it is that it feels good to go barefoot in the garden, which many people know intuitively that it feels good. Why is that? And the reason is every physiological system in the body is brought into balance. Everything we have been able to measure goes better, into more harmony and balance if you make contact with the earth. And it's really important to sleep in contact with the earth. And if you go to earthing.com, it's a source of simple things that you can use to connect yourself to the earth. One is a sleeping pad that has silver fibers in it, and the fibers connect to a wire that goes out your bedroom window to a rod stuck in the ground. Or you can use something like this, which plugs into the grounding outlet of your electrical system. And if you have a place that is painful, you can plug this into the wall and attach a patch, and this is a grounding patch, that you can put on the painful place, and the electrons from the earth neutralize inflammation. They stop inflammation in its tracks. And that's important because inflammation leads to chronic inflammation, leads to chronic disease. So that's one of the major energetics that people need to know about. Women understand this. They get it right away. Men go to the hardware store and get chicken wire and bring it home and put it on their bed. Chicken wire isn't very comfortable to sleep on.
Are you are you familiar with Doug Wallace's work in his research in mitochondria?
No, I don't know Doug Wallace, but I'll look him up.
Well, he at this point, and I don't know exactly the number, but it's a very, very high number of chronic disease related to heteroplasmy rates in the respiratory proteins of the mitochondria. In other words, that distance increasing and becoming less efficient. They are basically, cells are underpowered, and that will result in various chronic diseases. So it's something that I've been kind of exploring, and I just wondered if you had any insight or thoughts about that.
Well, we are underpowered because we don't connect to the earth. We wear shoes that isolate us from the earth. There are shoes that can connect you to the earth. They're called plugs, Pluggz. There's a website. They're comfortable, good looking, and they are electrically conductive. And that's very important for our health. And it's important for our energy. I tell people, athletes, if you're going to do an event, before you do it, take your shoes and socks off and stand on the grass in your bare feet for 10 minutes. You will energize your system. You will provide electrons for your electron transport chains in your mitochondria. The mitochondria are part of the matrix. They're attached to the living matrix. The acupuncture point, kidney 1 on the ball of the foot, is the beginning of the meridian system. And it's ideally placed so that every step you take barefoot on the earth, you're picking up electrons, which come, by the way, from the sun. You also are picking up the rhythms of the Earth's electrical field, which are tied to the Schumann resonance, all parts of the cosmos. So this is why I study astrophysics and geophysics, to understand the origin of the rhythms. So Yeah, we're underpowered. I agree with that.
Mm. Well, speaking about the Schumann resonance, I thought it was fascinating. You did an excellent job in your book describing this as most detail that I've ever read about the creation of the Schumann resonance, but also the fluctuation of it. And I did not know that it can fluctuate as much as 1 to 40 hertz depending on solar activity.
Exactly. And depending on the Earth's position in relation to the sun and the moon, there are tides in the atmosphere. We know there are tides in the ocean. There are also tides in the atmosphere. And so when the sun and the moon are above, they're pulling on the atmosphere, and the atmosphere bubbles up, and the ionosphere. And that's the electrically conducting zone a couple of 100 miles up. And there are rhythms, there are tides in the ionosphere which induce fields in the Earth and affect the Earth's magnetic field, and all of these fields are tied together. So as you sit out in the daylight thinking about the sun with your bare feet on the Earth, do it at the beach with your feet in the ocean, hold up your hands to the sun, and feel your connection to the whole cosmos. That's a profound thing to do, I think.
Last question for you, Dr. Jim, is around therapies that you've seen be highly effective. We did talk about, from the electron standpoint, grounding obviously is a great one for many reasons. I wonder if you have insight to psycho-emotional therapies that you've seen be very effective.
Yes, and that's why this group, the energy psychology people, are so important. They're having enormous success with, for example, post-traumatic stress disorders, treating the veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, many of whom are in a very bad emotional state. And Dawson Church, who's written a book, The Genie in Your Genes, he's actually the publisher of Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief. And Dawson Church has a website where he shows working on a guy, a veteran who is totally traumatized, and he's vibrating. He can't hold still. He's so upset. His whole family is upset. And Dawson does a few minutes of tapping with EFT, energy field therapy, and there's a whole bunch of these energy psychology techniques. And in a few minutes, this guy has calmed down, and it straightens out the whole family. It's very traumatic and very readily resolved with these different energy psychology techniques. So they're having a conference in Orlando, and I'll be talking about the heart.
Wonderful.
They do great work. It's very exciting.
I read in your book that you write a lot about rolfing as a way to restructure the fascial system, but also as a way to create some amount of emotional freedom or emotional cleansing. Is that in sort of the body work area? Does that still seem to be very, very effective? Have you seen something more effective?
It's very effective. It turns out that all body work. I asked my chiropractor, do your clients ever cry? He said, the flood goes out the crack under the door. All touch therapies reach emotional content. The reason that is so is very interesting, how emotions are stored in tissue and how they are released, and how is it that sometimes the therapist picks up on the story just by touching the part of the body that was injured. It's fascinating. I've written some articles about that with my wife. I call it, it's emotional memory. I call it somatic recall. And it seems that all therapists have these experiences, and the ones who have read my articles know what it's all about. It's about cellular memories that are released. And when they're released, energy goes into the environment. If you're sensitive, you pick up the story. And therapists who regularly work on human beings pick up stories. They get more and more tuned in to the emotional stories as they practice.
How can listeners get more information about you and follow your work, Dr. Jim? You have websites, social media, portals for people to find you?
The website is energyresearch.us.
Thank you so much for taking your time to speak with us. And the books are incredible for listeners that want to, just get the book and read it if you want to have a comprehensive, integrated approach to biophysics and energy medicine. Your first book anyways, and the update, which I'm looking forward to reading, is fantastic.
Well, good. I thank you, and I did them partly because somebody said you can't write a book about energy medicine. My best work has been things that I've been told you can't do. I like that. And it's to demystify a subject that's gotten a lot of bad press. Partly because in the medical world, doctors don't learn any physics in medical school. So when you talk about the electricity and magnetic fields around the body, they think you're crazy. And you're not. They've been measured, documented, well known. The electrocardiogram is a standard diagnostic tool that every physician has used. They don't realize it's an energy medicine tool.